The poet Rumi said that there is only one note, only one sound. Everything else is an echo. And the Universalist minister, founder of Universalism in America, said, "Give them not hell, but hope." So let us be a people, not only in this service, but more importantly, when we leave this place, echoing the sound of that one note, of that beautiful message, not of hell, because we hear a lot of hell in our public discourse these days. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we are known of the people who pierce through that with refreshing, echoing messages of hope? Let us worship together in that sentiment this morning. Well, this reading is from the Tao Te Ching. Do we have any followers of the Tao here in the congregation this morning? Yes? I didn't know I was a follower of the Tao till I was doing a wedding, and I was talking with the father of the bride who was a follower of the Tao, and then about a week later, I got in the mail a copy of the Tao, and it said simply to Chuck, a follower of the Tao. So I figured I should read it, which I did, and I find it very centering in my spiritual quest. Empty your mind of all thoughts. Let your heart be at peace. Watch the turmoil of beings, but contemplate their return. Each separate being in the universe returns to the common source. Returning to the source is serenity. If you don't realize the source, you stumble in confusion and sorrow. When you realize where you come from, you naturally become tolerant, disinterested, amused, kind-hearted as a grandmother, dignified as a king. Immersed in the wonder of the Tao, you can deal with whatever life brings you. And when death comes, you are ready. So this morning we breathe together with that original breath from the first human being that still moves through our bodies, that breath of life, that breath of spirit. And we pray that as we breathe together in this space, that breath will let us know clearly and unequivocally that we breathe not only into one humanity, but into one sacred Mother Earth. Amen, and blessed be. So this is from a Unitarian woman. And isn't it wonderful that we can have women as spiritual leaders? I would hazard the guess that most of the congregations, the churches in this area, would not even allow that to happen. So right there is a prophetic statement by this congregation. But Ella Lyman Cabot wrote this in 1918, and see if it might be somewhat relevant today. Our own future may be spiritually and physically rough, wild, and complicated. To meet its uncertainties, we need to know what to do in the woods when we have lost our life way, and in whirlpools that break to pieces our cherished hopes. Our future is in our power, not in what happens to us, but what we do with what happens to us. How can we best meet an unknown future? 3 things seem to be essential: resolve, resource, and discipline. In June of 2013, a woman woke up that morning, put on her pink shoes, and made her way to the floor of the Texas State Senate and proceeded to talk for 13 hours in what was known as a filibuster. I believe some of y'all know who she is. Anybody? Yes, I believe she's from this area. Is that accurate? Does she live in this area? Why was she doing that? Why would she take such painstaking efforts to speak for 13 hours? Because she was trying to run out the clock on cruel war on women bills that at that time Governor Perry was going to visit upon the women and the families of Texas. And this engendered the courage of people. Many UUs were in the gallery in what was called the People's Filibuster, in which the House chamber was unable to do its business when the clock struck midnight. Now, we know that Governor Perry called a second special session, and those cruel war on women bills were passed. Many of them, several of them were found unconstitutional subsequently, but the suffering that was visited upon the women and the families of the state of Texas remains to this day. And I will tell you that after that, we had 5,000 people at the Capitol. People all the way from strollers, infants in strollers, to older citizens walking in strollers. And when people told me, oh, it didn't make a difference what happened, if you would have told us before that session started that 5,000 Texans would gather for women's reproductive justice in the state of Texas, I would have said, you have been smoking something that's not legal in this state yet. It's only legal in oil right now, but we're working on the rest of it. So, why is this important to us as Unitarian Universalists? Is this is just the latest liberal fad, and we're just going to go right in with it without thinking about it at all, with no theological grounding, with no spiritual connection to it? I want to tell you that the reason it's important to us is it's in our spiritual DNA. Let me tell you a story about a woman named Judith Sargent Murray. She was born back in the 1700s in America. Her father was a well-known sea merchant, and they were doing pretty well financially. Well, her brother, he had his own tutor. to prepare him to go to Harvard. Judith was only afforded rudimentary skills. But since the family was of means, they had a very nice family library. And Judith Murray took it upon herself to read from that family library and educate herself. Later, she married a man named John Murray, who I mentioned earlier, who was one of the founders of Universalism in America. She joined him in that effort to expand Universalism in America. But more than that, she had been writing articles, poetry, prose about the equality of women. She wrote in a pseudonym, Constantina. Why would she need to write in a pseudonym? Anybody? Yeah. Do you think it was something risky to do in the 1700s? It might be something risky to do today. It is something risky to do today, is it not? Still, to come out boldly and say, we are a people, I am a person who believes in the equality of women, full bore, not just a bunch of lip service. She wrote what is thought to be the earliest treatise on the equality of women. She actually wrote it in 1779. But it wasn't published till 1790. It laid fallow for 11 years. And John Murray, her husband, to his credit, which I don't think was the profile of men at that time, was very supportive of her work. But finally, in the Massachusetts Magazine in 1790, after 11 years of sitting there on her desk, it was published. And here's a short excerpt of what that article said. She said, "Women, God breathed into women the same breath as God breathed into men. And it is by nature fully equal with men." That was a radical thing to say at that time and to be published. So the reason it's important to us, it's in our spiritual DNA. I'm going to take you back now to the Capitol. During those times when we were there rallying and in line to testify, I mean, we had lines literally waiting 2 and 3 and 4 hours to go and testify about these horrible bills in the Senate and in the House. And there was a woman from the First Jefferson congregation right over here in Fort Worth who she called me and she said, "Chuck, I see this as a pivotal time. I want my sons to know what our religion stands for. We're going to come to Austin. We're going to come to the Capitol. I want them to be there. I want them to see this. I want them to be a part of this." And so they came. And we saw all of the people from the anti-choice crowd. They were having their religious meetings. They were having their ministers rally people in the rotunda with music and with people shouting and getting all spiritually invigorated about their perspective. And she came up to me. And she said, Chuck, where is our rally? Where is our meeting? Where is our place to get spiritually grounded and spiritually invigorated about our perspective? And you ever had one of those questions where you have to look down at your shoes? I'd look down at my shoes and I said, we don't have one. We don't have one. Now, that doesn't mean there weren't ministers and people of faith and good heart and goodwill who were there at the Capitol for this situation, but we had not organized. We had not mobilized. We had not synergized. Because we had retreated so far back, allowing this small sect of one religion who are hostile and cruel and organized and want to force a theocracy onto the people and the women and the families of the state of Texas. We had allowed them to dominate the narrative so much, we had retreated so far that we had not even thought about it, had not entered our mind to organize together as people of faith and say, we are people of faith who believe in the moral agency of women to make their own decisions about their bodies and their reproductive health. And so, a few of us met together and said, this is not going to happen again. And that's when we organized Texas Faith Voices for Reproductive Justice. And we formed as a part of that what we call the Reproductive Justice Congregations. I believe y'all are one of those. Is that accurate? So there are about 16 religious groups in the state of Texas who have done this. I'm happy to tell you that 12 of them are Unitarian Universalist congregations. Because I issued a challenge saying, our rightful leadership, and if you know anything about the history, I've got a whole other sermon about that, which I will not preach today. But if you know about the Women's Alliance from the First Unitarian Church here in Dallas, we're a vital part of that history. And Roe v. Wade was actually derivative and flowed out of the efforts of the Women's Alliance at First Unitarian Church. But I'm going to tell you what happened. One of the people that came up with the idea for the reproductive justice congregation, who's part of a very progressive church in Austin, when they brought it before their board said, oh, that's way too radical. That's way too political. That's way too far out there. For us to stand up and say, we are a congregation who believes and trusts women in their moral agency. And that if that includes the decision to have an abortion, we support that woman. We support the Holy Trinity of a woman and her creator, the woman and her doctor. That's how far we have allowed the faith narrative to go to where now even our progressive congregations are afraid to literally come out of the closet for reproductive justice. Now I'm going to take you back in time again. Why is this important for Unitarian Universalists? It's part of our spiritual DNA. I'm going to tell you about a woman named Frances Harper. She was the daughter of freed slaves. But at 3 years old, her mother died. Her uncle took her under his wing and offered her rudimentary education. When she was 14 years old, she came under the employment of a well-meaning progressive white family. Do you remember those laws? What was the law about teaching a black person to read or write? It was illegal. Can you imagine? That seems so foreign to us today. But once again, you're going to see a pattern here. This family had a great library, and they afforded Frances Harper the opportunity to read and to educate herself from that library. She ended up becoming one of the most prolific authors in America, a very well-known poet. She was one of the first women to travel around and have crowds of people come to hear her read her poetry and her prose. And she refused to charge any African American to be part of her public appearances. She's a member of the Unitarian Church in Philadelphia. Now, she got invited to speak in 1893 when there was the World's Fair in Chicago, and they had a women's congress as a part of that. She was one of the speakers invited there. And here's a portion of what she wrote and what she spoke. She said, "Oh, right now, are you noticing there is this whole thing about emancipation of thought, of enlightened thinking?" She said, "This must go to women as well as men. Women must be equal sharers in this message of enlightenment and liberation." She said, "You cannot just raise one of the sexes. Both of the sexes must be raised equally." And I want to take you back to present-day America. Now, I was born in a Southern family. I'm the oldest and only son of a Southern Conservative Church of Christ preacher, and I was raised that the man is to be the head of the household, and certainly the oldest and only son is to be the head of everything, all of his 5 sisters. So I was raised in a male-dominated religious and cultural heritage. But I'm happy to say, because of this religion that I joined in 1996 and other matters and movements in my life, we got to understand that's just flat wrong. It's flat wrong. And so we're in a time now where there's a backlash. America is falling back into the worst of our original sins: racism, sexism, discriminating against people because of their nationality, their origin, the fact that you're poor and you want a better life for your family. And we have a temporary hostile occupier of the White House who brags about sexually assaulting women, who appoints people into cabinet positions who do these kinds of things. Oh, well, they denied it. That's all I needed to hear. We see many very well known, and even some progressive PBS, men, well-known progressive legislators who had indiscretions, who had used their power in ways that was not respectful. We have a Me Too movement. We had a Supreme Court situation, hearing that really focused on this issue. When Dr. Blasey Ford came and testified. And the best that some could do would to say, well, we believe her, but it must have been somebody else. Well, then you didn't believe her, did you? And when at our state house, when a bill can be heard in a committee that abortion is murder, and that the doctors and the women who participate in that could be subject to life in prison or the death penalty. This shows you how far we have allowed things to move. And it's time for people of faith to stand up and say, we are people of faith in the state of Texas, and we do not subscribe to this sort of perspective. We do not want a theocracy. We do not want other people's religious views to be the laws of the land. I'm going to take you back one more time to why this is important for us. Because it is in our spiritual DNA as Unitarian Universalists. I'm going to tell you about a woman who called herself a Unitarian when there wasn't even a Unitarian church to go to. When she Googled it, she couldn't find anything. Her name was Abigail Adams. You ever heard of her? Yeah? She had a husband who became a president of the United States. She had a son who became a president of the United States. Her father was a congregational minister. She wasn't, you're going to see a pattern here, she wasn't afforded an education except for the rudimentary thing to read and write. The family was well off. The family was well positioned. They had a family library. She educated herself. She became one of the most well-known spokespersons in America at that time and respected. So she wrote a letter. This was pre the 1776 convention in Philadelphia. We're getting ready to celebrate that, aren't we? Are we not? Here in a couple of days. Before they went up there, she had a little conversation with her husband, John Adams. And she wrote about this in a letter to a woman named Mercy Warren. And she said, I told John, when you guys go up there to Philadelphia, why don't you found a government based on just and liberal principles for men and women alike? And she said, I want you to know, we as women are not going to be part of something you guys go up there and put together in which we've neither had voice nor representation. And if you do, we might just foment a rebellion. And then I love this. She wrote, when I said that, he got a little saucy with me. Got a little saucy with me. So, I believe our calling from our spiritual DNA is to foment a rebellion. To be part of a rebellion that says it's not okay to have a war on women in America or in Texas. And we're going to stand up as people of faith, and we're going to articulate our spiritual principles and say, no, it's not going to happen. The game is over. Now, let me just say this as I close. It's not enough just to foment a rebellion. That's the starting point. Because as spiritual people, as spiritual leaders, as a spiritual faith and movement, we're ultimately about the transformation of people's minds, of people's hearts, of people's souls, and of the systems that allow these things to keep going. If you look at one of our sources there, it talks about that we are invigorated by men and women of the prophetic tradition who fought for justice through compassion and the transforming power of love. Ultimately, it is that transforming power of love that will bring the beautiful equality of all people to our nation and to our state. I know together, as Unitarian Universalists, we have that love in our hearts, and together we will make it happen. Amen.